This is Chapter 8 of Converging Media. This is Journalism from Information to Participation. We're going to talk about some of the principles involved in journalism and how they've changed from the past to the present. We will talk about a little bit about the development of journalism through the years. However, a number of these dates and some of these key things like this that you can easily look up, I'm not going to necessarily focus on or get into in great detail because they're easily accessible on your cell phone, on your smartphone especially. It talks about the functions of media and uses integral to three of the four main functions of mass communication. It talks about being central to surveillance, correlation, and cultural transmission. Again, this chapter, like many of the chapters, ignores one of the functions of news. News is now entertainment. News is now actually now advertising for other programs that are on that station. Channel 6, local Channel 6, Fox, and Birmingham always found that the results of American Idol, what's going on American Idol News, were a big part of their morning news show until, of course, it went to ABC. Now, all of a sudden, we don't hear about it. So it was news then, and now it's not news. Interesting. The other thing is that one of the functions is to create a profit for those people who own it. I agree with a comment made on, I think it was called The Newsroom, by the main character on the newsroom, who said that the people who, when the government was negotiating with the people who wanted to buy the airwaves, they told them they had to have an hour of information, public information, news, that type thing. What they didn't do, what they should have done, is said you cannot advertise during it. It's a good idea. So what is news? Talks about the news, depends on who you talk to. There are issues that arise when you think about the nature of news and what it is. One is sometimes news dwells a lot on the negative. And why aren't more positive things that happen? News. Talks about the fact that advertising and public relations has been, and other things like that have started to influence and manufacture news themselves. They've created pseudo events, staged to attract media attention and influence news coverage, but it's not necessarily even a news event at all. It's just an advertisement for a product. Journalists have an agenda-setting function. They influence what we think about and discuss in our lives. Journalism is also subject to economic realities. If a company has an interest in a product, they try to make sure they're not putting out stories and putting news stories on. They're going to hurt that product. Back when the NFL had all the stuff about people sitting or kneeling or whatever it may have been, the networks, about 2 years ago or so, they were reporting on it on a fairly regular basis. All of a sudden, I think the networks realized, you know what, we're actually hurting our own ratings here by continually reporting on this. All of a sudden, any mention of anyone sitting in the NFL or kneeling or whatever it may be, any mention of that just disappeared. And I was like, okay, now that's interesting. All right, all of a sudden it's not news. Okay, I don't blame them. They were hurting their own ratings. The historical development of journalism talks about the penny press and how when it began to be very, very inexpensive to publish newspapers, it created circulation, and then circulation created the ability to advertise and other things along that time and sell the paper for a profit at a very, very, very low price. Talks about news values and the Associated Press. One of the core values in journalism is objectivity. The Associated Press tries to embody four other core journalistic values. Commitment to truth and accuracy is one of them. Commitment to the integrity of the news, to not plagiarize or copy work. Avoiding conflicts of interest. The news is not doing that very well anymore. A commitment to the value of ethics, having a moral basis for the news and saying things and reporting things in an ethical way. The problem that has happened is that the producers behind the scenes, the people that they put on the air, they've created, especially on the cable news networks, but even on the national news on ABC, CBS, NBC, they've started to become in favor of certain political parties, certain values, certain ways of thinking. They started to push it on the air. And they've started to push it on the air to the point that there's no longer a journalistic standard of commitment to truth and accuracy if it doesn't serve their purpose. I'm not meaning to just be mean to MSNBC. I promise you this, I can find the same type of slanting the news on CNN and on Fox News as well, in which something is reported in such a way that it's being reported to represent something and present something in a way that is not an accurate reflection of what happened or what's going on. MSNBC News a few years ago, when the president announced that we were going to try to get the job done in Afghanistan, the old news conference, he said, we're going to do whatever it takes to get the job done. Well, that can be taken a lot of ways. I went to CNN and looked at their coverage of what he had just said when he was done. I went to Fox News. I went to MSNBC. Lo and behold, on MSNBC, the banner at the bottom said, President promises troop increases in Afghanistan. That was very specifically not something that he said. I saw the whole thing. I saw the entire speech. It was not something that he said. And so that was just blatantly false news, faking the news, however you want to think about it. It wasn't stretching the truth, because he never said there was going to be a troop increase. He says that there may be, if he had said there may be a troop increase, stretching the truth is he said there's going to be an increase. He never said there may be an increase, so therefore that's not stretching the truth. Talks about Pulitzer and Hearst and the circulation wars, sensationalism and standards. Sensational journalism, news that exaggerates or features lurid details and depictions of crimes and other events, very quickly became very popular because people read that more. Talks about Joseph Pulitzer creating the Pulitzer Prize, of course, but interestingly enough, he was known for his use of illustrations of very racy style and colorful headlines. The color comics in the Sunday papers were one of Pulitzer's most successful innovations. Along the way, there came this time where someone termed yellow journalism, described the sensational style of the Pulitzer and Hearst newspapers, and some people thought that alluded to something else, but actually alluded to a cartoon character, the yellow kid in his yellow shirt. Anyway, the emphasis on public service journalism and accurate reporting remains a cornerstone of the annual Pulitzer Prizes. Which again, there's a little bit of irony to that because of some of the things that were published at the time. William Randolph Hearst, of course, he created his own editorial guidelines, make the news thorough, print all the news, condense it if necessary. That's sort of the basic. And he created a news empire. A news empire, became very rich off that. Along the way, there was the rise of electronic journalism. Television broadcasting news began in the late 40s and early 50s. Talks about Edward R. Murrow and news and TV's golden age. Well, I'll tell you this right now. They've called the 50s and 60s TV's golden age, but I am not sure that's accurate. I think we may be living in TV's golden age. He once said that television in the main is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate us. Interesting statement by a guy who was known for his own, standards that he did have and what he put on the air. Changes in television news. There's electronic news gathering equipment that allow journalists in the field to capture and send news by satellite to the network. And with the digital now, they can go on the air live from wherever they are and just create the story and report the story instantly on the spot with satellite, ability to upload your image of satellite from cell phone technology to upload it instantly and be on the air immediately with that report, as opposed to just taping it and then sending it in. With 24-hour news channels now, there are larger news holes to fill and lower standards for what stations deem newsworthy. I find it interesting. I've actually watched many stories on different channels, and I'm not picking on anyone, but I've watched different stories on different channels in which I wondered, how in the world did that get on? Okay. It's really interesting, though. I have noticed something. When I see a news story about the release of a product or the release of a book or the release of a movie, something on that line, inevitably within that newscast, all of a sudden, boom, there's a commercial for the product. That's why it was big news. They were being paid to advertise it, and they told them, if we're going to advertise on your news station, we want a story about this. And of course, they're going to do it. It's money. Foundations journalism talks about the Hutchins Commission and a free and responsible press. The press is supposed to be free to report the truth, free to do what they need to do to hold the government accountable at the same time, but it's supposed to be the truth. It's not always the truth. NBC News got caught a number of years back. They were talking about a truck, and this truck had a problem. If it got hit in a certain place, it would blow up, and they didn't felt like it blew up enough. So they added some explosive materials in the truck. Man, they made that truck blow up. The only problem was there were some explosive experts that were watching that video and said, no. That had explosives in it. and they finally called NBC on the carpet, and they admitted to it. That's not the right way to do it. And it's not just NBC. CBS has been caught falsifying, creating a false news story as well. We're not going to go into that right now. Separation of editorial and business operations. Unfortunately, that's almost impossible. This idea is that news coverage cannot be influenced by business decisions. We just talked about that in the last section. Just can't happen. It does not happen, actually. It could happen, doesn't happen. It does talk about the fact that separation has been eroded by the fact that these huge corporations let their commercial concerns influence their editorial comment. It was about fairness and balance in news coverage, equal and just consideration of all sides of a topic. Does not mean equal space, but to give all sides an equal consideration. Now, that's an interesting idea. Does anyone that's listening to this believe that's happening on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News? They're giving all sides of whatever it is they're reporting equal and fair consideration. If you do, I have some oceanfront property in Arizona to sell you. It actually is on it faces both the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. The Eiffel Tower is there, as is the Taj Mahal. And from that location, you can also, it's just a very short journey to Mount Everest, and you can be at the tallest point on Earth, all at an oceanfront property in Arizona. That's in case you believe what I just said. Talks about framing the news. We sometimes force facts to fit a preconceived frame. That's what sometimes people do on the stations, and it's a threat to fairness and balance. However, it also helps us make sense of our world. We fit information that we have come into the frame of what we believe to be the truth. We have a frame in which we fit things. And if they don't fit, we tend to discard them, even if there's a lot of evidence that maybe our frame is incorrect. We tend to discard those. The use of expert sources, of course, is supposed to enhance story credibility. And unfortunately, in terms of trying to create an equal view of everything, those sources have predominantly been, by and large, white and male. And that does not necessarily create an equal view of the world. From event to public eye, how news is created. The past 30 years, hard news has yielded to lighter fare. Celebrities, popular entertainment, and other related subjects. 40% of local TV news is now weather, sports, and traffic reporting. I've sent an email to the head of the Channel 6 News here in Birmingham. I like him in the morning. There's a guy on there named Mickey. He's the weather guy. We like Mickey. I like Mickey a lot. That's one reason we watch that channel in the morning. But as I told this lady in my email, but every 6 minutes, really, the weather doesn't change every 6 minutes. The forecast cannot possibly change every 6 minutes. Every 6 minutes from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m., whenever time we stop watching, there's a weather forecast. And I don't understand why. Anyway, gathering the news talks about journalists refer to the AP Daybook or at night for tomorrow story ideas. The media spotlight tends to create more news, by the way. If there's a big story and more people are covering it, then it becomes even bigger news. Producing the news in meetings, usually hours before the deadline, newspaper editors decide which stories are most important and where they will be. They look for logical weaknesses, errors, and gaps in stories, often asking reporters to get more information. Fact checkers research stories for accuracy. Copy editor corrects writing and in-house style errors. And that's all good. This is sort of an ideal the way news has been done and should be done. It's not always done that way now, and we all know that. If you have a specific news source and you believe that everything in that news source is completely true, accurate, and objectively reported, I hate to tell you this, but you are very subject to what it is, whatever it is they're putting out. You're going to be very subject to be influenced by that, and it's not, and they're not all accurate. I don't care which one it is. They're just not. They're not all fair. They're not all unbiased, and they're all reporting the news exactly the way it may have happened. And it's problematic if we think somebody is. Going forward, talks about distributing the news. Print media was distributed through subscription and newsstand sales. That's changed a lot because of the internet, and people, most newspapers now are trying to get an internet following because they know that long-term there may not even be newspapers that are sent out. I still have one coming in every morning, but I canceled it when my local newspaper changed their price from $60 for 3 months to $100 for 3 months. I canceled it. Now they offered it to me for $48 for 3 months. I bought it. Types of journalism, there's interpretive reporting, attempting to situate the facts of a story in a broader context. That's typically something that's done. Alternative journalism purposely defies professional conventions in both tone and topic. Gives a spin on the news that may not be representative of sort of the whole. There are groups that are marginalized as a postmodernist concept. They're marginalized. They're put out in the margins. You look at a sheet of paper. I don't have a sheet of paper. Yes, I do. Look at a sheet of paper. There's a margin here. There's a margin over here. Okay. This is the whole and the main. Sometimes people are left over here and not included in the whole by the fact they're not discussed, sometimes by the way that they're discussed. And that's problematic. Public journalism expands the watchdog role of the pace while engaging the citizenry more actively in news creation and discussion. Strives for more nuanced reporting that avoids framing stories. Not a lot of people are doing that right now. There's citizen journalism. Now, a lot of times you see stories where a citizen has pulled out their cell phone with their handy dandy video camera, and now they are out there reporting the news and phoning it back into a news station, local news, or possibly even network. Although networks are more hard because they're going to do that a lot. It'd be harder to put that on. Talked about international perspective. In many countries, journalism still face censorship and restrictions on what they can say. Journalism in the digital world, there are non-traditional sources now for news because of the digital journalism. A high degree of media literacy is especially helpful when assessing the news sources and biases of alternative media. There are some news sources, by the way, that are really done as satire, and unfortunately there are some of these news sources, some of these websites that do satire, and some people will take a story from a news source that's doing satire. They will post it on. I've seen it done. They'll post it on Facebook as if it's true and says, "Oh, this makes me angry. I can't believe they're doing this." And you're looking at it, and it's theonion.com or some of these other strange little news sources that are doing satire, and it was done as a joke, and yet this person's taking it out of context, and now they're like, everybody's getting all mad about something that is put up there to be funny. Talked about online user habits. Users are generally more active, visiting multiple websites. Readers tend to skim material rather than read at length. Digital news experience can lack depth, by the way. You might not get the whole story. There's also personalization. The standard of a story can be enhanced with database information based on your online behavior. It's really funny how when I'm looking at my phone, I click on that little button on the side that just feeds me stories. All those stories tend to match what it is I'm interested in. It's not really funny. We know that's going to happen. It talks about contextualization. People want someone to provide a certain context and interpretation, really, of the news. We do. We do. And a lot, that's why we tend to go and seek people that agree with us. If we're conservative, we tend to watch Fox News. If we're liberal, we tend to watch CNN or maybe MSNBC. Talks about convergence, how convergence can enrich primarily video stories by creating greater depth and context and different access to information. On most places online, you can go and you can watch the video sources, or down below, typically you can read the story. They're both usually there. It talks about business of journalism, salaries, and the more popular you are, the more money you're going to make. They're really popular sports people, news people. They're going to make a lot of money. There are people who have actually created their own following on YouTube and other places, Instagram, social media. They've created their own following, and they've actually ended up being offered jobs by mainstream networks because, hey, we want you on our show. You've got a lot of followers. There is an there has been a huge increase in diversity in the newsroom. I grew up in the South in the 1960s and 70s, and the reality was there were just very, very few, if any, Blacks or African Americans on the news. That's changed a great deal, by the way. That is the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9 done shortly.